people make history so much more interesting.
I agree.
Oh, goodness. I hated history growing up. I've probably told you that before because, like most others, I was suffering under books stuffed with facts, treaties, things to memorize that didn't hold meaning to me.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back with Linda and we are talking about history, and this is fun. This is part of our Homeschooling Every Subject series, and we're talking about history this week because, you know, that's an important topic. It's an important subject that all of us teach at some point in our homeschool journey. And so, it's funny, Linda, you were talking about how history is required in high school, but it's one of those subjects that all those first-time homeschool moms in kindergarten are like, what do I do? How do I teach my kid history? And I'm like, they're 5. It's okay. They don't need to know all the history facts at the age of 5. Just teach them how to read and write and, let them play. And so, so I like that you just kind of gave us that permission to, like, you don't really need to worry about it until the high school years. But I know that in those middle school years and elementary years, we can start dabbing, just dabble a little bit into history. And that's really fun as well. So especially for those kids who really like history.
Or the ones that don't.
Right. Or the ones that don't. Exactly.
Yeah. Give it to them in nice bite-sized pieces that they might enjoy it better.
Right.
Lay a foundation.
That's right. So today we're going to talk about the what. Like, what is it that we need to know about history? We talked on Monday about the why of history, why it's important to know history. So today we'll talk about the what, and then tomorrow we'll talk about the how, and we're just going to pull it all together. So I know it's going to continue to be an encouraging conversation, but before we get into it, I want to say thank you again to our sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. If you're looking for any curriculum for any subject, any age, any grade that is taught from a solid biblical worldview, check them out at bjupresshomeschool.com, and they've got something for everyone. So whether you want the student to watch videos and be taught that way, or you want to sit down and teach them yourself, whatever style is best for your family, they've got something for you. bjupresshomeschool.com. Well, Linda, welcome back to the podcast. And let's talk about the what. Let's talk about what is it that we need to teach. And you touched a little bit on this on Monday, but I want to go a little bit deeper into the what is it actually that we need to be teaching our kids? Like, can you maybe give us an order of what to teach when?
Sure. I think what really helps is a visual of a funnel. So picture, broad first and narrowing it down. Now, I might surprise you by the order I'm going to put the funnel in, but I would say top of the funnel is time period, because to make history a bit more manageable, we really need to divide it by time period. I'll name them in just a few minutes, the common ones. So think time period first, and then the next part of the funnel, I'm picturing the people that lived of that era. And then last, I'm going to put the events. Now, unfortunately, I think you and I grew up on the type of history where events went ahead of people. And that's why we hated history. We didn't hate history. We hated the way it was taught because it was so event driven, dates and treaties and such. Yeah. And we didn't have time to get to the stories of the people.
Right.
So I would go time period first, people second, and then I'm going to sprinkle in the events because obviously we need both people and events really working together. But with a stronger emphasis on people, lots of things happen. Now, before I get into all that, let me go back to the time periods, though, just in case some of your listeners are sort of new to what's even out there on the market. So there are commonly 4 eras that tend to get marketed out there. It is ancient, first of all, then it is medieval, then the Renaissance and Reformation usually go together, and last, modern. And then, of course, American history is its own standalone that can go in any order broken in through there. Now, I just wanted to say that as a Christian, I'm going to add a layer to each one of those time periods. For example, ancient for me is not only going to be the secular, but the sacred. So I'm going to weave Bible history and world history together in ancient times. For the medieval time period, I'd like to hone in on the history of the church, what was going on after Christ. And then third, with the Renaissance, it really is looking at the Reformation because it really shows God's hand as man thinks he's just all that during the Renaissance. God's like bringing him down and going, And then with modern history, I think it's just important to continue to see God's hand, perhaps in American history or wherever the student lives anywhere in the world. So it's finding yourself in modern time. So that's just a quick thing on the 4 time periods. can we go back to people now?
Yeah. Yes.
That's so much more fun to talk about. So again, I rank the study of the people higher. For one, because of what we stated the other day, is that looking at the people, for one, it reveals the nature of mankind, which is that we are all depraved, sinful, and in need of salvation. That's why there is a gospel. So first and foremost, the study of people shows us the flaws of, quote, the good guys and the bad guys, because even the good guys had their flaws. But of even greater importance, people make history so much more interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, goodness. I hated history growing up. I've probably told you that before, because like most others, I was suffering under books stuffed with facts, treaties, things to memorize that didn't hold meaning to me. But I will never forget, Yvette, I was a freshman in college. I was in my first Western Civ class, and I sat on the front row, and the professor began to tell stories. I'm pretty sure he started off with the Tudor family, like Henry VIII and all his wives. And I was like, wait a minute. I didn't know that was in history. I mean, it's, of course, quite a soap opera, the Tudor family, but it drew me in because it was stories about people. I don't think the man even used notes. And that just lit me up. So people are more interesting. But I have another favorite example I have to give you. So once in a while, it's not uncommon for me to be at a flea market or a garage sale or a thrift store, and I find a history book. And what I'll do just for fun is I'll flip the history book to the back, to the index, and I look up Cleopatra. And in most history books, you turn to the page with Cleopatra, and it's going to give you 3 or 5 sentences about her, because they put all the history in one book, which is a mistake. But anyway, those 3 or 5 sentences are only going to reveal something along the lines of she was an Egyptian queen, the last of the Ptolemies. Well, first of all, you can't even pronounce Ptolemies. It starts with the letter P. So, it's like, so what? It doesn't mean anything. But if you want to tell me the way she first met Julius Caesar, which is that she had herself wrapped up in a carpet and dropped into his office, well, that's going to get my attention. Then he's assassinated on the windy Ides of March. So she attaches herself to Mark Antony, who dresses like an Egyptian when he marries her. So the Romans hate him. She winds up in a civil war with Romans. And to make long story short, as a result of her death and Mark Antony's, Octavian takes the throne of Rome, who would name himself Caesar Augustus and run a census about 20 years into his reign that all would be taxed and needed to go to their homeland, which is why Mary and Joseph saddled up. She's with child and go to Bethlehem. So all to say, that is a story of a person that had a tremendous influence indirectly over even fulfilling Scripture. It was prophecy that Christ would be born in Bethlehem. That requires a story of Cleopatra if you really want to pull it all together. So anyway, now that was long ago. I do have one a little bit more recent, may I? Since you revealed in our last episode that I'm writing American history. So I do have to add this one. I have not terribly long ago become enthralled with John and Abigail Adams because I started reading all of their letters. Now, a lot of people already know them through their love letters. Those that don't, they were separated for years during the American Revolution, and therefore they wrote letters back in the day with no phones and no text. So we have letters. We have captured their romance and love for each other. But I liked learning who they were first as people, so that then when I drop them into the events of the American Revolution, I'm like, oh, that's what Abigail had to say when she stood on the hill and saw, the Battle of Bunker Hill, or like, oh, that's what he said to her, after, he had this horrible experience in England. It's like their letters or the events of the American Revolution meant more after I knew them. That makes sense?
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, you've just got to prioritize people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love reading stories of people. It captures me so much more than, reading about any war or anything, any dates that I need to memorize. You throw people in there and read about their lives, and it just makes it come alive. I mean, that's what's exciting about in history reading books, just good literature. Sometimes it's fictional and sometimes it's not. But things that just make those stories come alive. And I think that makes history so much more fun. So we've got more to talk about, but we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Have you tried CTC Math yet with your child? Here's a testimonial from another happy homeschool mom. Amber said, "I'm absolutely thrilled with CTC Math. It's a rare find that I've used with my children for more than 5 years now. I have 6 children using CTC Math, and each child has found it easy to navigate and very applicable. Thank you so much for all that you are doing in providing quality math lessons for my children. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com. That's ctcmath.com. Are you looking for a homeschool curriculum that goes beyond textbooks and truly engages your children in the joy of learning? Apologia's award-winning curriculum is written by homeschool parents to specifically meet your needs and captivate your students with hands-on activities and experiments that make learning unforgettable. With an easy-to-follow, open-and-go format, Apologia takes the stress out of planning and provides a simple roadmap that can easily be tailored to your family's needs. Explore live classes or self-paced courses designed to accommodate every student's unique learning style. Elevate your child's education, spark their curiosity, and nurture a lifelong love for learning with Apologia. Discover Apologia today at apologia.com. We are back with Linda. I love talking about people. Like I said, I'm a people person. And so I love stories of people. They inspire me. They convict me. My favorite person in history, my listeners already probably know if they've listened to this podcast for any length of time, is Corrie ten Boom. I love her. I cannot wait to meet her in heaven. She is my hero. And as you've mentioned before, she wasn't perfect. And, you know, I love that she's so transparent about her life and about her sin and about, you know, who she really was as a person, her struggles and how she would contend with the Lord sometimes. But man, she lived her life for the glory of God. And I want to be like Corrie ten Boom. If I had another daughter, I would probably name her Cornelia. So anyway, but continue on, because I love talking about this subject of people and history and how it ties together.
Well, a byproduct of studying people is that it may inspire your students in some future calling or in a conviction or in a career one day. Yeah. And I say that because I literally felt called to study world history. I believe, well, there were many inspirations, but one of them had to do with staying up at night and reading about the Trail of Tears, such a moving story and a tragic story in American history, the relocation of the Native Americans to Oklahoma. And which, of course, you're in Oklahoma, so you probably feel and experience a little bit more of that. But all to say, it moved my heart so much because I can't really explain it, but as a people person, I do feel like I have a way to put myself in other people's shoes, no matter the time period. And when you do that, when you personalize it, when you imagine walking down a trail with your own son or daughter and, you know, your husband got left behind, or, you know, when you can personalize it, it's moving. And so I became a historian from being moved by stories. So imagine for our children, if nothing else, this history and looking at people, we're exposing them to different people's callings and convictions, like all the missionaries who would feel called. Hudson Taylor, he had just been saved when he felt that he heard the Lord calling him to China, which was, you know, so far away back in those days. You didn't just jump to China very easily. To hear the prayer life of George Mueller, who just had compassion for orphans that he saw in the streets. He thought he would be a foreign missionary until he just saw the kids on the street and said, I think I'll just stay right here. And he just prayed and prayed for their provision. Or stories of abolitionists like Sojourner Truth. To see history through their eyes. So I think that the stories of people can literally change our lives, because it's not hard to look around and say, okay, well, what injustices are being done today that I could have such an impact as a Sojourner Truth? Which, by the way, I just want to say, I think today's great plight, similar to that, was probably abortion today. When we look at the numbers, and it's like, well, what can we do for this cause? And we hope one day future generations will look back and say there were leaders and people who, you know, stood for life. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. It's hard to stand for truth sometimes, especially when the whole world is against you. You know, it seems like the world is going one direction and we're going a different direction, but we have to go the direction that God calls us to go, even when it's going against the grain. And that's tough. And that's what so many of these people did, right? I mean, they were willing to stand firm and strong on their convictions. And truly. It seems like very few people, and I won't say few people today, I think few people through all of history were willing to do that. But part of it too is that they know their history. Yeah. Right. They're able to look back and say, because
of the sin of men, this is what this sin is going to lead to. And so I don't want this to happen on my watch.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it.
They want to impact the world. They want to leave a different kind of legacy for their families and for their children and their grandchildren. And
the Lord told us to care for the oppressed.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So give us one last advantage of looking closely at the people in history.
Sure. Well, dare I say it could be a little bit fun. Fun in that when you start to connect people, you're kind of like, I see. Because so often the study of people leads to the study of other people. And then you realize, these were contemporaries. And for example, I think it's hard to understand or maybe appreciate Raphael unless you've studied Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, because the three lived right at the same time period. And they would say Raphael totally stole all the great ideas that Michelangelo had on anatomy, because he really mastered the human body. So Raphael got that from Michelangelo, but he got all that tenderness and the pretty stuff from Leonardo da Vinci. So it's a whole lot more fun if you studied the first two masters to appreciate the third. That's just one example.
Yeah.
Then let's go back to American history. I think that to really appreciate Alexander Hamilton at all, you have to know the backstory of his feud with Thomas Jefferson, because those two were absolute bitter rivals, one wanting big government, one wanting small government. So you can hardly appreciate one without the other, which, by the way, that's still relevant today because ultimately they started what we would describe as two different political parties today. Sure. And then this is just recent. I've been studying the story of Dorothea Dix. Not everybody knows who she is, so I'll throw it out there real quick. But she had a real heart for the mentally insane. I mean, she lived her entire life just dedicated to really improving asylums and institutions and just trying to humanize the people who had just previously been locked up. She had a heart for that. Well, in studying her story, I realized or came to learn that she would liken herself to Florence Nightingale. They never met, but she saw and knew what Florence Nightingale was doing in Europe when it came to helping in hospitals. So when the Civil War broke out here, she wanted to be like Florence Nightingale. So she had someone to admire. She literally had black dresses made so that she could look more like Florence Nightingale.
Oh, wow.
I just think that's really cool. And of course, you can't appreciate that about Dorothea Dix if you don't know the story of Florence Nightingale, which comes from a whole nother time period. But anyway, so just interesting parallels, I guess, is another way to put it.
Yeah. Yep. It all relates somehow.
It really does.
Cool.
And listen, just before we leave, because I talked about a funnel, so I said time period, people, but I don't want to leave out events. So let me just quickly say, obviously, we don't neglect the events. I just like to see them last, sprinkled in there from everything that I said. But the other thing about events is that they really do give us cause and effect. So a few favorites, you can't really understand the Dark Ages unless you've looked at the fall of Rome, because it's really because Rome fell, that meant all the Roman soldiers went away. So there's no one. So feudalism starts up in Europe in the Dark Ages. So that's a cause and effect. Then another one, there would never have been an Anglican church had Henry VIII just gotten the divorce he wanted from his wife. He couldn't. The Pope wouldn't let him divorce his wife. And so he starts a whole church. And then the Anglicans are the ones that persecute the pilgrims. So they come here. I mean, it just goes on and on. So yes, cause and effect. And one more, even when we look at Adolf Hitler, I don't think he would have been able to pull off duping the German people quite to the extent that he did, except that they had suffered in the Great Depression. So there was so much economic need that when he would tout that he had a plan that would improve their way of life, they fell for it.
Right. Yeah.
So those events absolutely matter.
Yeah. They really do. Okay, more to talk about. This has been so good and so much fun. I want to come back tomorrow and talk about the how. How do we teach history to our kids? Because there are different ways that we can teach history, and some are not as fun as others. And so we're going to help you make it more fun for your homeschool moms. Thank you, Linda, for being with us again. Tell our listeners one more time where they can find out more about you and the Mystery of History. Yes, themysteryofhistory.com. I have a newsletter, all sorts of things to connect you with. We will put that link in the show notes. It's super easy to find. Thank you so much for being with us, Linda, and we will be back tomorrow with her. Stay tuned to the very end to hear what's coming up next on the podcast. And if you guys have missed my husband Garrett's podcast, The Thinking Dad, check it out. It's so much fun. We continue to hear from so many moms who are listening, and oftentimes it's moms listening with their husbands, and there's tons of husbands listening as well. And so I love that the Lord is using that podcast as well. It's called The Thinking Dad. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, but you can find that on any podcast app, wherever you're listening to this podcast as well. So have a great rest of your day. We will see you guys back here tomorrow. Bye.
We've got an urgent situation. If we knew we were in a war zone, which we are because we live in the middle of a spiritual battle, we would not say, well, let's take a few days off while the battle's going on. We're called the spiritual battle. Let's step up and take responsibility for that.
Even if we're able to push the evildoers and the totalitarians back for another generation, if they've got the young people, it's over.
I often think about Daniel's parents, who you don't hear anything about. But they must have laid down the foundation for Daniel to be able to go into Babylon and not fall.
This is Garrett Hampton, host of The Thinking Dad. Join us for the first season at thinkingdad.net.
There's stories and then there's stuff to do. So let's just talk about stories for a minute. All of us are going to learn history better through a story format. And any age can enjoy the same story. You could have the story of the Trojan horse, and a little 4-year-old might actually enjoy it because there's little soldiers stuffed in a horse that get rolled into a city gate, right? But a 99-year-old can still enjoy the story because it's just fascinating, right? So stories really are the key. I like to look at them as the meat, and then everything else is a side dish that you can add or take away. But the side dishes, they serve a purpose.